Hi, everybody, and welcome this evening. My name is Andrea Radmaker. I'm a certified professional midwife in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm a member of the Kentucky Home Birth Coalition's Steering Committee. This presentation is about the work that we're doing to get licensing for certified professional midwives here in Kentucky. We will be presenting a bill in the Kentucky Legislature for the 2016 session, which begins January the 4th. KHBC is a consumer organization. We have a few midwives, but the majority of our members are families and parents that want access to improved access to CPM and home birth in general in the state of Kentucky. So the first question that we get all the time is, isn't home birth illegal in Kentucky? And the short answer is no, absolutely not. There are no laws on the books in Kentucky regulating where a family may birth their child. There are no laws that tell anyone that they must be in a hospital or a birth center or at home. However, your midwife is required to have a permit or a license to practice legally in the state. And this is where folks get confused a little bit. So for a family, there is no legal obligation to birth anywhere in particular. However, if you hire a midwife, if she's a certified professional midwife or another direct entry midwife or traditional midwife, she does not have a permit to practice, and therefore she is practicing without a license. CNMs are licensed and may provide care in any setting, and CPMs, specifically direct entry midwives, are required to have that permit. In the state of Kentucky, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services stopped issuing permits in 1975. So there has not been any legal certified professional midwife or direct entry midwife practicing in Kentucky since then. What's the difference between a nurse midwife and a certified professional midwife is also another question that we get a lot, and the answer is education and scope of practice. Certified nurse midwives are people that are trained in the two distinct disciplines of nursing and midwifery. They have a graduate level education after they get their RN. They have prescriptive authority, which means that they can write prescriptions. They're licensed in all 50 states. They serve people throughout the lifespan, which means from the time you're a small person until you die, CNMs are able to provide you all kinds of care. 95% of certified nurse midwives work in the hospital setting in the United States, and to become a certified nurse midwife, you don't have to have any out-of-hospital training. Certified professional midwives get their certification through two separate educational routes. There's a portfolio evaluation process, or the PEP process, which consists of a traditional apprenticeship, independent study, a skills exam of over 200 identified skills necessary to be a competent midwife, and a written exam. There's also the MEEC accredited education model. There are 10 accredited schools in the United States. They include a 1 to 3 year educational or didactic program, and then they include a clinical experience in an apprenticeship model. As far as we know, in Kentucky, most, if not all, of the CPMs were trained under the portfolio evaluation process, which is important for some information coming down in the next couple of slides. Since 1970, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there were no laws licensing non-nurse midwives. In the United States, currently there are currently 30 states that license or provide permits to certified professional midwives. and Rhode Island and Maryland are the states that are the most recent to have passed legislation. And this year, South Dakota, Illinois, Michigan, Kentucky, and Alabama are all pushing for licensure. So why do we want to license CPMs in Kentucky? Kentucky law actually states that the Cabinet for Health and Family Services should issue permits to direct entry midwives. It's the law of the land in Kentucky that midwives be permitted or licensed in some capacity. CPMs are the only maternity care providers primarily trained in out-of-hospital settings. We want to bring qualified maternity care providers to rural and underserved communities. Licensure offers increased access to insurance and Medicaid coverage of home birth services. Licensure will increase access to testing, medications for emergencies, and standard of care needs such as ROGAM. Licensure will allow for safer transfers from home birth settings and birth center settings to the hospital, and there will be accountability to the community for unsafe practices. The bill that the Kentucky Home Birth Coalition is presenting to in Kentucky our legislature does a number of things, including creates a board of midwifery. This board will write all the regulations that will govern practice for midwives. It will say what midwives can and cannot do. It will oversee applications, set peer review standards, create a public complaint process, and is comprised of 3 CPMs, 1 CNM who has experience in out-of-hospital birth or collaborating with home birth families, and 1 community member who has utilized out-of-hospital care from a midwife. Our bill defines the scope of practice using NACPM and NARM standards. So what that means is that our bill says that midwives can do all of the skills and are able to perform any of the any needs that we're trained to do. So the National Association for Certified Professional Midwives and NARM, the North American Registry of Midwives, will allow us, our bill says that we can do the things that we are trained to do, is the short answer. It uses the CPM credential with the U.S. MERA agreement as criteria for licensure and would allow CPMs to obtain and administer ultrasounds and lab work. What our bill doesn't do is require CPMs to work under supervision or in collaboration with other providers. Our bill does not determine conditions that would be defined as high risk. Our bill does not require midwives to carry malpractice insurance. And our bill does not require pregnant clients to see an OBGYN. So the next part of our talk is going to be about the U.S. MERA agreement, and that stands for the U.S. Midwifery Education Regulation and Association. U.S. MERA is a coalition comprised of representatives of national midwifery associations, credentialing bodies, and education accreditation agencies. In 2013, the 7 U.S. midwifery organizations got together and began to negotiate on how to get more CPMs, more states to license CPMs. The organizations that are involved in the U.S. MERA agreement are the Midwives Alliance of North America, the National Association of Certified Professional Midwives, the North American Association of Midwives, the American College of Nurse Midwives, the Midwifery Education Accreditation Council, the Accreditation Commission for Midwifery Education, and the American Midwifery Certification Board. These 7 organizations represent the vast majority of midwives in the United States, and have been working together to come up with educational minimums for midwives, as well as ways in which the nurse midwifery community and the certified professional midwifery community can come together to improve access throughout the United States. So what does USMERA do? The USMERA is an agreement that sets educational minimums for states that want to create new licenses for CPMs. The agreement states that beginning January 1st, 2020, all new CPM candidates will be required to go through a MEAC accredited program. Any midwife certified prior to January 1st, 2020 will be required to obtain the Bridge certificate issued by NARM to qualify for licensure. And any midwife who is licensed by a state that does not require MEAC education may also obtain the Bridge certificate to qualify for licensure in states using the USMERA agreement. So what that means is that all of the midwives that are all of the certified professional midwives that are currently practicing in Kentucky would be required to go through and obtain the Bridge certificate. Any new students that will be learning to become CPMs and in apprenticeship models or going to school will have to go through a MEAC accredited program, one of the 10 MEAC accredited programs in the United States, to be eligible for licensure in Kentucky. The Bridge certificate is a 50-hour program of approved continuing education units in 3 categories. What I have listed here are just examples of the numerous number of CEUs that are approved. I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a taste about what is in each of the categories. So the first category is emergency skills in pregnancy, birth, and intermediate postpartum. That includes the ALSO course, which is the Advanced Life Support and Obstetrics course, BEST, which is Birth Emergency Skills Training, intravenous fluid administration, and many others. There are about 20 different programs that are approved in this first category. Emergency skills for newborn care, which includes conditions affecting the newborn, fetal heart monitoring, and neonatal resuscitation programs. All of the midwives in Kentucky currently keep their neonatal resuscitation program certificate up to date. So that's one of the things to remember, is that most of the midwives are going to have many, if not all, of these CEUs already taken care of. The burden on midwives is going to be relatively low or minimal, because most of the midwives in Kentucky are competent, safe providers who have been keeping up with their CEUs and have already done a large amount of this training. The last category is specific topics relevant to midwifery care, which would include cultural competency, issues in domestic violence, and perinatal bereavement counseling. Whew! That was a lot of information, so here's a little happiness. And so here's some of our info for anybody that's interested: our social media contacts, our email, and the website. And I'm happy to take questions at this point.
So, excuse me, if you are logged on from your computer, you can type a question in the chat box and we will receive that. You can just type the question to everyone and I'll read the questions for Andrea. Or if you are dialed in from your phone, just make sure you don't have yourself muted and you can go ahead and ask your question out loud if you're dialed in to your phone. Any questions? Here's a question. Why can CNMs, nurse midwives, not assist with home birth?
So CNMs absolutely can assist with home birth. It is well within their scope of practice, and some do. In Kentucky, we think that there are 3 or 4 nurse midwives that attend home births. The issue is that they're not required to have any training to attend a home birth. So a midwife that may have attended several thousand births in the hospital may have a very different set of practice standards than what is appropriate at home. And then the other point is that most CNMs just don't practice at home. The slide earlier said that, and that statistic is from the ACNM, the American College of Certified Nurse Midwives. It says that 95% of their midwives practice in hospital settings.
So in Kentucky, it's really a personal choice for most nurse midwives. That's a great question. And again, if you're logged in from the computer, feel free to type in a question, or if you're dialed in on the phone, feel free to ask a question out loud anytime. Our next question, Andrea, is, will licensing CPNs in Kentucky improve prenatal care access to Kentucky's rural areas?
Absolutely think that it will. One of the really scary statistics about Kentucky healthcare is that 74 out of our 120 counties do not have any maternity care providers in the state, which means that 84% of Kentucky families live in a county where they are traveling outside of their home county to see someone for maternity services. By licensing CPMs, we expect more midwives to move into the state and or to begin practicing. We also know that birth centers and home birth practices are lower cost alternatives to hospital and OBGYN-based practices. And so because midwives have lower overhead, we feel like they are going to be able to open up practices and serve broader parts of our state where hospitals have been closing and OBGYNs have been closing at a consistent pace for the last 10 years.
That was another great question. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, or if you're dialed in from your telephone, also feel free to ask any questions you have out loud. All right, well, if we do not have, there's another question. Will the new bill allow CPMs to practice in birth center settings?
Absolutely. One of the things that our bill does, and that's a great point, Erin, I'll add it to the slides, is that our bill does not restrict the place of practice for CPMs. So one of the things that it says very specifically is that it does not limit where a CPM can practice. And so it really would be our scope of practice that determines where we can work. So that means that CPMs, we are trained in home birth and birth center settings. And so we would be able to work in both of those types of settings. Most CPMs do not have the proper training to work in a hospital, although there are a few across the country that work in birth centers that are owned by hospitals. So that might be the exception.
Another great question. So again, if anyone else has any additional questions, feel free to type those in the chat box or ask them out loud. And here's another question. Are there currently any birth centers in Kentucky, and do you foresee more opening if this bill were to pass? And what would the time frame be for a new birth center opening up? That's a lot of questions, but you're the right person to answer those, Andrea.
I am. So there are no birth centers in the state of Kentucky currently. And part of that is about the regulations that are the regulations in Kentucky about opening up a birth center. My private practice has been trying to open up a birth center for several years. We are eyeball deep in red tape, and actually in our third round of suing to be able to open up a birth center. That is all very tricky, and in addition to my position on the Kentucky Home Birth Coalition's steering committee, I am also working with my practice to try and change the laws that govern birth centers so that we can open more of them. Yes, the answer to your question about would this bill help birth centers, absolutely. With CPMs being licensed, we expect to see birth centers increase in, we expect the number of birth centers to increase, but it's a two-pronged approach. We have to do both things. We have to get CPMs licensed, and we have to change the regulations around the Certificate of Need process, which is the specific law that makes it so hard to open up a birth center. The time frame is really unknown. Like I said, my practice has been trying since 2009 or 10 to open up a birth center, and we have to date not been successful. So there's a lot of work happening around that, and that is one of our biggest goals, is to get CPMs licensed and to get birth centers open.
All right. Well, another excellent question. If the two things are definitely connected. So again, if anyone else has any additional questions, feel free to type those in the chat box or ask them out loud if you're dialed in from your phone. We have a few more minutes left for questions. We'll go ahead and add that if you think of a question after we end the meeting tonight, you can always contact us through our Facebook page, via email, or through any of our social media channels, and we will certainly answer your question and get back to you and make sure that you get the answer to that question. So if there are any other questions, go ahead and ask those now. And if not, we will go ahead and conclude our meeting. We will have recordings available if you have any friends that weren't able to attend this meeting, or we have another meeting on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, or 9 a.m. Central Time, for anyone who can make that meeting. And once the meetings have concluded, we'll get some recordings up on the website and get links out to that so that you can share that with any of your friends and family who may not have been able to participate in either meeting. And one of the best things you can do is whenever you see us post something on social media is to help by liking or sharing that, so we make sure that we reach as broad an audience as possible. And make sure also that you're on our email mailing list and you receive all of our legislative updates, because we are definitely going to have a lot of requests for our supporters as this bill becomes live in 2016 in the legislative session. So I haven't seen any other questions come through on the chat box, and I'll just pause for a moment in case anybody that's dialed in on the phone has a question that they need to ask and they need me to be quiet so they can ask it. All right, well, I think that concludes our call. Thank you, Andrea, for presenting to us tonight, and thank you, everyone, for participating in this call. I hope that we answered a few things for you, and again, we appreciate your support and hope you have a wonderful night. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.